Are comic books actually dying? I know that seems hard to believe, especially since comic book movies hit theaters several times a year, each one earning about the rough GDP of most small nations in box office sales. But comic books themselves aren't doing so well these days, and it may seem hard to believe, but there may come a day when this art form is nothing but a distant memory, some say. But are they right? To answer that question, I'm going to have to lay a bit of art history on you. See, art was kind of a big deal back in the day. Before TV and radio, it was actually seen as one of the main escapes in society. Then King Louis XIII came along, and just like the Friday that also bears that number, he was bad news. King Louis was born in 1601 and ascended to be king at the tender age of 9. This made him a spoiled man baby who demanded to be the center of attention of all things. He even went as far as to move the royal palace, relocating it from Paris to Versailles just so the nobles would have to travel hours and long distances simply to get an audience with him. He also didn't like the messages that were being put out in art at the time, messages about science and religion, anti war, and the role of the aristocrat in society. So he ordered the creation of the Royal French Academy of Art, a school where a person with talent would be identified, trained, taught to make acceptable art, and anyone who wouldn't conform to the Academy's standards of context and technique would not be granted the title of master and would find it very difficult to make a living as an artist. The art that came from the Academy was gorgeous, but it was also repetitive, tame, and worst of all, it was boring. And then technology came on the scene. The invention of the camera was a game changer. Now anyone could create a portrait or a landscape. It was cheap, it was fast, and copies could easily be made. As photography became more and more a recognized art form, the Academy became more and more irrelevant. It began to seem like the great era of art and artists was coming to an end. Until, remember those artists that the Academy rejected for not conforming to their approved styles? Well, they were back. They called themselves the Impressionists, and they created a new movement in art. Their work was free and flowing and colorful. People thought it looked like something that came out of a dream. It was unlike anything anybody had ever seen before. Certainly not like anything that could be produced by a camera. Impressionism led to Cubism. Cubism led to Surrealism, and so on and so on. Some of the greatest movement in art came as a result of the status quo being threatened by the changing times. But how does this relate to comics, you might ask? Comic books have been around for over 100 years. In the beginning, superheroes were actually a very small part. There were different genres to fit different interests. Horror, western, and romance were actually among the more popular. It was a visual medium and at the time was unlike anything else on the market. They were inexpensive, they were available almost anywhere, and you could say it was a golden age for comics. Then this guy. This is Dr. Frederick Wortham. Wortham was a doctor specializing in early childhood development, and he blamed comic books for all the evil in the world. He would go on to pen a now infamous book titled The Seduction of the Innocent. In the book, he laid out his long case against comic books in painful detail. He said that all the problems with America's youth were laid at the feet of comics. He claimed that comics encourage violence and disrespectful behavior in children. Sounds a bit familiar, don't you think? He even testified before Congress, where he states comics make children into violent, disobedient juvenile delinquents. He blames comic books for homosexuality and gender confusion, and we can see why his arguments haven't aged well over the years. So, in the end, the comics industry cut a deal. They agreed to self-regulate their content. Thus, the Americans Comic Authority Code was born, a draconian list of rules that forbid comics from any depictions of realistic violence, romance, seduction, horror, the undead, the occult, drug use, and the list goes on, thus crippling many of the top-selling books at the time. Yes, it seemed like comic books were circling the drain, and then something new hit the scene. A couple of guys named Stan Lee and Jack Kirby showed up with a new superhero title called The Fantastic Four. Lee and Kirby had been working in science fiction publications and translated the background into a superhero comic rich with monsters, spaceships, aliens, and characters that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. They were fresh and captivating, and all the while completely adhering to the comics code. More would follow. The Avengers, Hulk, Thor, X-Men, and Spider-Man, storied about relatable and flawed characters that lived in a fantastic world. Marvel even went on to write a powerful story about teen drug use and the dangers of addiction. When the Comics Code Authority rejected the story due to its inclusion of drug use, they published the books anyway, and they were the first comics printed without the authority's approval in almost 15 years. They went on to be recognized nationally for bringing awareness to serious issues, and ultimately allowed comics to eventually move away from the Comics Code entirely, paving the way for new, more mature, and complex stories to be told. Comics as an art form had evolved into a smart, unique, and visual medium. But today, comics find themselves under fire again, seeing sales, reader interest falling to an all-time low. Many are quick to attribute the death of print media to this decline, but the decline in print media has more to do with the evolution of how people get their news and information, and Japanese manga sales have steadily increased each year for more than 2 decades in America. Some point to the increased competition for our attention from social media and the rise of content streaming services, but we've seen technology versus art played out in the past. Others blame the increase of heavy-handed partisan political themes in modern comics. But in the beginning of the 20th century, we saw art evolve to handle politics before: anti-war, pro-war, commentary about our political leaders, and whatever this was. But yes, this was a thing. This was a thing that happened and was in art galleries. The Dadaist was a weird time. These comic characters are iconic. They've been in our pulp culture for a better part of a century, and you couldn't travel to the farthest reaches of the world and likely find somebody who would recognize them. Perhaps comics will ultimately assimilate and use our changing technologies to find new ways to bring you new stories and content. Or people will use the new age where everyone is connected like never before to sell comics directly to their customers using crowdfunding and social media to reach people, bringing new voices, new characters, and new stories to readers. Whatever comics will look like in the future, one thing I'm certain is that they will be here, and they'll be here for years to come, because history has taught us that art can endure. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great day.